Good afternoon, listeners. It's about 3 o'clock here in Sydney on a Wednesday afternoon, and it is pouring with rain. We've had flooding in Brisbane, and it's come Sydney's way, and it just seems like there's so much happening in the world. We've got the Russia-Ukraine conflict that's happening now. We've got floods in Australia. We've had people recovering from COVID, which has been a continual presence, and I'm noticing a lot in practice. It's harder and harder for people to stay positive, and people are feeling so overwhelmed by what's happening on such a worldly level that they're just actually struggling to cope in their immediate lives, because in their current lives they've got their own current stresses and responsibilities. And then in the wider world, we're finding that the world is in chaos. And then what's happening is people are saying to themselves, well, how can I be feeling this way if there's so much worse things happening in the world? And I just want to encourage everybody, please don't devalue what is happening in your life because you're looking at the bigger picture and saying, well, I can't compare. I've got no reason to feel upset, or I don't have a right to feel the way that I feel because look what's happening in the wider world. And that's where I want to encourage you and say to you, stop. Just because your world isn't the same as the world that's happening out there doesn't mean that what's happening to you isn't real and it doesn't matter. It does matter. The most important responsibility that you have for yourself is to acknowledge and validate how you feel, understand why you feel that way, and then make a conscious effort to stay above ground. So what do I mean by that? The difficulty with emotional regulation is that sometimes when you're not able to regulate, you go below the ground. So I want to give you the analogy of a rabbit and a rabbit digging down a hole. So in psychology, we'll have an expression, if your thoughts start spiraling into a negative place and you're obsessing, we're saying you're going down a rabbit hole. Okay, so I want you to remember the two images. Here's your immediate world. And here's the outer world, the chaos, the Ukraine-Russian conflict, the floods that are happening in the world, COVID, and so forth. And then there's your immediate world, which is the stresses of everyday life. Perhaps it is financial stresses. Perhaps it's relationship stresses. Perhaps it's just generalized worry of things that are happening, or illness for some perspective. I want you to think of your life as there's ground, there's what's beneath the ground, and there's what's above the ground. Your role in life is to stay on the ground, okay? You stay on the ground when you're aware of what your stresses are and you're taking steps to try and manage your stress levels, okay? When you start going below the ground is when you start thinking, overthinking, obsessing, getting to a very extreme anxious place or an extremely dark place. Then we say you've gone down that rabbit hole, which is going beneath the ground. When you start going downwards, your emotions are dysregulating. They are not calming themselves. You're not able to self-soothe, and you're not able to get back to a place of functioning. Okay, so I want you to start realizing what you need to do is to acknowledge your immediate environment. Acknowledge that you're feeling a certain way. Acknowledge how you're feeling and what you need to be able to feel better. In the last talk, I spoke around 4 steps for emotional regulation. Journaling with those 4 steps will help you to avoid going down the rabbit hole of obsessing and just stay above ground, where you can acknowledge what I'm feeling is okay and it's real in my world. But Russia and Ukraine aren't my world. It doesn't mean that I don't feel what's happening to them, but I'm not in that world. So I can't pretend that I'm living my life in that world because it's not my world. And I need to remind myself that my world has value. Just because it's not in complete chaos, like Russia and Ukraine, doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. And it's so important not to devalue that process. I hope that helps. So just to summarize the key of today's session, when you are feeling stressed, tell yourself the most important thing is to stay above ground. Staying above ground means that you emotionally regulate. And emotionally regulating yourself means that you acknowledge the stresses of your environment through the 4 questions. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What do I need? And how do I satisfy this need? Once you're able to address those answers and do something about those answers, you avoid going down the rabbit hole, which is underground. So stay above ground and remind yourself, my immediate world stresses do not become less than or should not be shoved aside because the greater world is in chaos. I need to respect and empathize that the greater world is in chaos. If there's some little thing that I can do just to put my little bit in, that would be wonderful. But the most important thing is to also look after your immediate world. Your key responsibility is to your immediate world. Okay, I hope you've found this talk helpful. If you have any comments or any questions or anything you'd love to add or suggest, please feel free to drop them in the comments box. Until next time.